So hello and welcome to this NPTEL course entitled Feminist Writings, where we're looking at Charlotte Perkins Gilman's Yellow Wallpaper. So we have already started with this text and we'll just continue with this in this lecture. So we have seen how in the previous lectures there's this very interesting tension between the female experientiality and the male medicality, and the male medical knowledge seems to patronize the female suffering, the female protagonist of suffering, does not take that seriously as a disease and has a very condescending and patronizing attitude towards it. So in this section we will find how that, that sense of being patronized continues throughout this text. And as I mentioned already, this particular text takes the form of a diary writing. It's almost like a diary entry. And it gives you a sense of urgency and immediacy. So you get a sense that you're reading it at the same time that it's happening. So it tells you things such as, I can hear the footsteps coming, I can hear John coming, I must stop writing, etc. And you seem to share, the temporality of the writing process in the moment you're reading it. So, the writing process and the voice of the writer, the speaker in this particular section or the particular treatise, seems to be co-temporal with that of the reader reading it. So we'll see how that kind of tension and how that idea of this experience of being patronized continues throughout this text. And we saw how she was forbidden from writing anything, and that because that was supposed to have created self-absorption and narcissism, and that's not something that the doctors have prescribed for her. The male doctors wanted to think outside of herself all the time, as a result of which she is doing this clandestinely, secretly. Okay, and now we are told that John is away all day, John being the male medical doctor, the husband. John is away all day, and even some nights when his cases are serious. I'm glad my case is not serious. So again, we have this whole idea of not taking this seriously. Considering this to be some kind of a pseudo disease or a malady which is not a proper disease. And obviously that the sense of not taking this properly as a disease is a very, very male patronizing perspective from a medical sense. But these nervous troubles are dreadfully depressing. John does not know how much I really suffer. He knows there is no reason to suffer, and that satisfies him. So the whole idea of reason becomes very important over here, because reason is a very male tool in this particular section. And whatever cannot be fathomed with reason, with rationality, empirically, is not taken seriously. So anything that is outside the empirical gambit or the gambit of empirical knowledge, is not taken seriously by John, the male medical figure. So we have this very interesting collusion between patriarchy and medicine at work over here, and that collusion is what makes this female protagonist suffer, because that kind of a collusion of gaze, the patriarchal gaze and the medical gaze, which refuses to take this seriously, which refuses to treat this with dignity, and which essentially coerces her, confines her, forces her into certain kind of treatments that she doesn't get anything out of, and she ends up suffering more. And we'll find how at the end the Yellow Wallpaper becomes very symbolic space, because what happens in the Yellow Wallpaper is the entire idea of the female figure in the Yellow Wallpaper seemed to be speaking to her as a form of entrapment, as an experience of entrapment. So we have seen already how the movement in this particular text is one from aversion to one of appropriation, aversion to association. So she is essentially, at the beginning of this text, she loathes the start of the Yellow Wallpaper, she is detested by it, but yet at the end she finds herself associated with it, in the sense that a woman figure in the Yellow Wallpaper seems to be her. And when she takes it down, when she tears it out of the Yellow Wallpaper, and when she tears the wallpaper out of the wall, essentially, she feels an experience of emancipation. Right, and that experience of emancipation is something which is very symbolic as well as experiential in quality. Okay, so we are told over and over again that John really finds no reason to take this seriously, and that satisfies him, and the fact that there's no reason for her to suffer. Of course, it is only nervousness. It does weigh on me, so not to do my duty in any way. So it's just nervousness. So the whole idea of female nervousness, I talked about hysteria in the previous lecture, and how there was very conveniently classified as a female malady, something which happens to women alone. And of course, this classification, this medical classification, was a very male classification. It was something which was done by male doctors. And we find this figure of Silas Weir Michel, the very famous American physician, neurologist maybe. It has a very spectral presence throughout this text. I mean, he is very much the figure of authority, which is dictating these rules of medical practice, of confining, coercion, rest cure, and all the rest of it. So what this protagonist is going through is a very famous Silas Weir Michel rest cure. So the rest cure is where the protagonist, or the patient, is forced to rest. It's confined to a house, given a certain kind of diet every day, and it's taken away from all kinds of emotional, all kinds of social connections, and is meant to be a recluse till he or she recovers, she in more occasions. So this whole idea of therapy through confinement, therapy through containment is very much a part of the rest cure package that Salas Weir Michel, the American doctor, had prescribed. And so Michel is a very important figure in this particular text. And as I mentioned already in the previous lecture, that Gilman, at the end of writing this book, sent a copy of this book to Salas Weir Michel as some kind of a symbolic reprimand to the Michel rest cure. And of course, she never heard back from him, unsurprisingly. Okay. And then she goes on to say, the speaker goes on to say, the narrator goes on to say, I'm meant to be such a help to John, such a real rest and comfort, and here I am, a comparative burden already. So she's made to feel guilty for not being productive enough, for not being utilitarian enough, etc. And then, we're told that how John is this very busy doctor who embodies rationality, who embodies male medical logic. And according to that male medical logic, this particular symptom, this particular condition that she's suffering should not be taken seriously. It's not really a disease at all, and all she needs is a rest cure. Okay, so, and that's something which told to us over and over again. And then we are told by the narrator that I suppose John never was nervous in his life. He laughs at me so about this wallpaper. So when I tell him about the wallpaper, when I tell him about my discomfort with the wallpaper, John laughs at me, and just brushes it aside in a very patronizing way. So I suppose John never was nervous in his life. So nervousness is not really something which happens to men. Men are never nervous. It's always women who are nervous. So this kind of a crude binary, and we can see how even the medical symptoms, how the medical classifications are very conveniently mapped onto this gender binary. The men are never nervous, men are always rational, men are always in control of whatever they're doing, whereas women are always hysteric. They're always prone to hysteria, they're always vulnerable to hysteria. And yet at the end of this book we find the person who feigns, the person who passes out, is the great medical male figure, John. He passes out in the end, he faints in the end, towards the when the wallpaper is torn down. So hysteria is actually conferred to the male. Okay, and then we are told that at first he meant to repaper the rooms. At first he agreed that we should repaper the room, take this paper away. But afterwards he said that I was letting it get the better of me, and that nothing was worse for a nervous patient than to give way to such fancies. So fancy is a very important word over here, and we are told that John, the great male medical figure, forbids her from imagining too much, forbids her from storytelling, forbids her from introspecting, forbids her from self-absorption. And all this forbiddenness, all this idea of forbidding her from all these different things is very much part of the male medical logic of confinement and cure and containment. And all that is done in a very, very empirical kind of way. So anything which is outside the empirical gambit is forbidden by default. And she's told that we should not be give way to such fancies, give way to such imagination or imaginative inwardness, as it were. So he said that after the wallpaper was changed, it would be the heavy bedstead, and then the barred windows, and then the gate at the end, at the head of the stairs, and so on. So he told her very categorically that if you change the wallpaper now, you'll start changing everything else, and that's never going to end. So it's very important that you get a grip on the situation, you calm down. Again, this is a very, very male kind of rhetoric to ask a woman to calm down, presupposing that a woman is not calm, presupposing that a woman is very, very hysteric already. Okay, and then we are told, then he took me in his arms and called me a blessed little goose, and said he would go down cellar if I wished and have it whitewashed into the bargain. So this whole idea of taking the woman in his arms and calling her endearing names is part of the patronizing package, is part of the male idea of confinement and containment, this time through affection, or apparent affection, where he takes her in his arms and calls her my blessed goose. Then essentially tells her that I'm going to do everything for you, but it's for your own good. I'm not really taking the wallpaper down, right? So this whole idea of patronizing kindness, patronizing benevolence, patronizing endearment is part of the perspective, part of the gaze that she is subjected to. Right, and talking about gaze, talking about medical gaze, it's important that we make the connection to a text which you have done previously, which is Sylvia Plath's Tulips, because even there we find that a female protagonist, the speaker in the poem, is subjected to this very male medical gaze all the time, and then she suffers an experiential crisis, an existential crisis, and that takes away her agency, that takes away her mobility at a mortal level as well as a more extended, embodied level. Okay, so, and then we are told that, how space becomes very, very important over here, and how the whole idea of being confined to a space is part of the rest cure method advised and advocated and prescribed by Silas Weir Michel, and John is very much part of the tradition, that medical tradition of rest cure. And then we are told that it is so discouraging, and she goes on to say, it is so discouraging not to have any advice and companionship about my work. When I get really well, John says he will ask Cousin Henry and Julia down for a long visit. But he says he would as soon put fireworks in my pillowcase as to let me have those stimulating people about now. So again, the whole idea of not stimulating her and the whole idea of forcibly calming her down is very much part of the rest cure method. And then, she says quite clearly that, I really wish I had some companionship. I really wish I had someone to talk to, someone to advise me and talk to me about my work. And the whole idea of writing, not taking writing seriously, not taking the woman writer seriously, is part of the male medical gaze, which is empirical, rational, logical, and anything outside that parameter is not taken seriously, is considered to be child's play, considered to be trivial activity. And so what we find over here is something which we have discussed already, which is a complete exhaustion of empathy, a complete crisis of empathy. There's no empathetic connect, there's no human connect at any human level. So we have this medical machines, we have this medical medicines, and a medical gaze, which is very empirical, very rational, very logical, very material in quality, confining and containing her in a certain space and a certain spatiality, and that space generates certain identities or crises of identity. But we are also told over and over again that there is actually no empathetic connect. John doesn't understand her. John doesn't even try to understand her, and he forbids her from writing. He forbids her from seeing people, and he tells her it's all for her own good. But of course, she suffers it all the more because of that. Right, and then we are told the other woman figure in the story appears, that is John's sister, and it's very important how the two woman figures, how the two female figures are contrasted with each other. There comes John's sister, such a dear girl as she is, and so careful of me, I must not let her find me writing. So again, the whole idea of hearing footsteps coming in, the whole idea of seeing someone coming in and stopping to write immediately is conveyed to the reader as well all the time. So we get a sense of that you're reading it even as it's being written. So there's a sense of present continuous, which is always there in the story, and that gives it a sense of immediacy, a sense of urgency, a sense of theatricality, and also it really dramatizes the experientiality in the story. And we talk about experientiality all the time. We're looking at feminist writings, because the whole point of feminist writings is to look at the entanglement between experientiality and textuality. So what we have over here is quite literally a mode of textual production. So text is being produced out of an experience. So there's constant connection, the constant osmosis, as it were, or symbiosis between the text and the experience is something which we must never lose sight of while reading this in a particular book. So I must not let her find me writing. And we are told that she's a perfect and enthusiastic housekeeper and hopes for no better profession. I verily believe she thinks it is the writing which made me sick. So John's sister over here, is a complete conformist. So she is very much part of the housekeeper an identity that is very, very conveniently conferred onto the woman. So she's a perfect housekeeper. She keeps everything in place, and she thinks verily that the writing is what is making her sick. So she should stop writing, according to John's sister. So John's sister is very much complicit with the entire male medical narrative of containment and confinement and rest cure that she's been subjected to. Okay. So, and then we are told at this point how she begins to see a figure in the wallpaper. She begins to discern presence in the wallpaper in a very, very interesting way. And we are told that this wallpaper has a kind of sub-pattern in a different shade, a particularly irritating one, for you can only see it in certain lights and not clearly then. But in the places where it isn't faded and where the sun is just so, I can see a strange, provoking formless sort of figure that seems to skulk about behind a silly and conspicuous front design. So, that she seems to see a figure lurking behind the conspicuous design. So she is very, very disturbed by the lack of harmony, the lack of symmetry in the wallpaper. But she seems to see through the symmetry, the lack of it. She seems to see some kind of a provoking, formless sort of figure emerging out of it, right? And that's silly, and that seems to skulk about behind the silly and conspicuous front design. So beneath the shallow, superficial front design, if she looks well enough and if the light falls on conditions, she's able to see a formless sort of figure. And we see this is a figure that is very symbolic in quality, and that figure will get more and more shaped as the story progresses. And in the end, she'll find that the figure is actually her, and that she'll tear it down, and in the process of tearing down the wallpaper, she will experientially emancipate herself from this medical gaze, and as a result of which the male medical figure will faint. John, the great husband, medical officer, will faint at the moment that happens. And then we are told there's sister on the stairs. So we can hear the sister coming up on the stairs again, so I must stop writing. So I can't go on, I shouldn't go on, because I'm forbidden to go on. So again, we are told, and the reason why I'm doing these sections very, very sort of closely, because I'm going to skip a little bit from now on and move on to the important passages, because I'm hopefully we get a sense of what is really happening, the drama of claustrophobia, the drama of containment, the drama of confinement, where this female figure is confined to a certain space and is forced to take rest, is forced to be disconnected from all kind of social reality, all kind of social connections, and that violence which is there, ironically, in this rest cure, is very much part of the male medical package, the male medical gaze that she's subjected to. So, there's a very interesting relationship to be unpacked between treatment, medical treatment, and medical violence. And of course, we see how, if you look at the history of medicine, this collusion between medicine and masculinity, medicine and male gaze has always been historically true in all kinds of situations, especially in the history of Western medicine. And of course, the state has always been a colluder to this kind of a narrative, where the state controls medicine, where the state controls medical politics, where the state controls definitions of hygiene, definitions of health, etc. And more often than not, those definitions of hygiene and health and harmony are very, very male and patriarchal in perspective, as a result of which anything which is outside those definitions is considered to be transgressive, considered to be unhealthy, considered to be in need of cure. And that cure, the process of cure, is very often a very violent process, as you can see over here. So violence over here is physical violence. She's confined in a room. And also it's emotional and psychological violence, because she isn't allowed to get out and make the connections, the social connections, the empathetic connections, which will make her better. And also she's not allowed to express a free self in writing. So the whole idea of writing, the whole idea of textual production in this particular book becomes a very, very clandestine and secret process, and secretive process. And in the secrecy lies the lack of agency, and also the articulation of agency to a certain extent, because she does manage to articulate the agency through the process of writing. So again, we're back between making the connection between textuality and experientiality, which is what we continue doing throughout this course. So I'll stop at this point today, and I'll continue with this text in the next lectures. Thank you for your attention.